humans interact with intelligent robots that are virtually indistinguishable from them, this illustrative dialogue takes place between a human and an AI. Are you real? The human asks. Well, if you can't tell, does it matter? Responds the robot. The robot's question encapsulates very well, I think, the fundamental question behind this doctoral thesis. If AI will ever reach human level and will become indistinguishable from us in terms of capabilities and behavior, would this matter for theological anthropology and for how it articulates its understanding of human distinctiveness? This presentation is structured in 4 parts, taking the story of my research from its starting point up until the questions and paths that it opens. The research started from the tension perceived between the intuitive specialness of humans and the possibility that AI might replicate and surpass human ability in the not-so-distant future. On the one hand, we find in the Bible a very strong affirmation that humans are somehow singled out from the rest of creation, because they and only they are created in the image and likeness of God. The Bible does not say very much about what this image means, but Jewish and then Christian anthropology have been constructed around a very firm belief in this doctrine. On the other hand, we live in an age where AI is making impressive progress. AI is no longer the domain of only sci-fi aficionados. On the contrary, there is an increasing concern across society regarding the consequences of building such a powerful, strange, and unpredictable technology. More relevant, the possibility that AI might, in not-so-distant future, attain human level and master any compartment of human cognition and ability is again on the table. Departing from these 2 starting points, one coming from theology, the other one coming from the current development in AI, the problematic of this thesis emerges very naturally. Its essence can be largely expressed in these 2 questions. Firstly, if AI will ever reach human level, could theological anthropology still speak of humans as being in the image of God? And secondly, how would reflecting on the challenges of AGI help theological anthropology clarify and refine its articulation of human distinctiveness? Here are the main methodological steps that I followed in order to try to answer the research questions. The first step was to analyze and compare the various interpretations of the Imago Dei. There are several candidates for how to best understand the image of God, of which the best known are the structural, the functional, the relational, the eschatological, and Christological. I will not go into details of what each of these means. These candidates are not necessarily mutually exclusive, so they can coexist with each other to a certain extent, and they all have their strengths and weaknesses. So the purpose of this initial analysis was to distill some coherence in the otherwise colorful and at times chaotic landscape that I perceive to be the one in theological anthropology. The next step was to study the ongoing dialogue between theological anthropology and evolutionary science on human distinctiveness, and this was a necessary and useful rehearsal for the future debate between theology and AI pursued later in the thesis. The next methodological step was a comparison between human and artificial intelligence with the aim to tackle the crucial question whether the brain can be seen as a computer. In order to do this, I first overviewed the comparison between the brain and digital computers in terms of structure and functionality. Then I looked at symbolic AI and the computational theory of mind and its criticism, mainly the ones formulated by philosopher Hubert Dreyfus. And finally, I reviewed the computer scientist Neil Lawrence's so-called embodiment argument, which tries to account for the current differences between machine learning algorithms and human intelligence. Another methodological step was to dive deep and explore the notion of AGI, or Artificial General Intelligence, human-level intelligence, by trying to speculatively answer some crucial questions about it. How could we know that AI has become AGI, in case that happens? What hurdles need to be overcome on the road to AGI? Is it likely that we ever achieve AGI, and what could the timeline of this development look like? What sort of intelligence would AGI be? Would it have a mind? Would it think? Would it be conscious or free? And finally, of course, I had to bring the theological interpretations of Imago Dei in dialogue with the findings of this analysis of AGI. We now move to what I think are the main findings of this research. Firstly, I think the theological articulation of human distinctiveness, as it emerges out of the dialogue with AI and science in general, cannot be simple. We cannot simply say that humans are distinctive because they have this or that capacity. Things are unfortunately much more complex than that. On the other hand, such an articulation cannot be too vague either. I mean, we could say that humans are the only higher ape with few hair and who uses social media, but this definition, while technically correct, might not be too useful to our purpose. Every species is unique after all. So when we speak of human specialness, we are speaking about the specialness of a different level. That's why the multi-level interpretation emerged as a more promising way of defining human distinctiveness, because it is both nuanced and sophisticated enough without remaining too vague. This is how the multi-level model looks like in my mind. I tried to place the various interpretations of Imago Dei on these rather concentric circles, which go from the very hot core, which is a sort of intuitive truth that we agree upon. It's a truth of faith, and that is not debatable by science, and goes up until the outer edges of the circle are what I call non-theology, like philosophy or science. And the various interpretations of the image of God, I think, can be placed on this circle, with some, like the structural interpretation, more to the outer circle, and some, like the more theological interpretations, the functional or the relation or the Christological one, closer to the inner circle. But this is exactly why the structural interpretation is more vulnerable to criticism than the other ones, because it is the only one that engages in an open dialogue with non-theology. So we shouldn't be too concerned about such criticism. The non-structural interpretations, on the other hand, they are more theologically meaningful, but they are also less able to have a real dialogue with science, unless science accepts the existence of God and the creation of humans in the image of God, which is, of course, something that is not universally shared. So this is what the circle is about. Another finding of my research is the subtle but very important difference between human-level intelligence on the one hand and human-like intelligence on the other hand. We have a very innate tendency to anthropomorphize things around us. So whenever animals or robots behave as if they were human, we think intuitively and irrationally that they might actually think like us. However, as it turns out from the speculative evaluation of artificial general intelligence, if AGI is ever possible, it is very likely that it will be non-human-like. So you can have an intelligence that is human level, but not human-like. We can already see, for instance, how current AI applications function or think very differently from a human brain. And we know, for instance, that the brain most likely does not operate via sequential logical algorithms. And it doesn't use a sort of mentalese language either, that is the language of the brain, which is postulated in a computational theory of mind. It is also obvious how machine learning algorithms are learning in a very different way from a human mind. They need sometimes hundreds of thousands of examples of things, whereas a human brain can learn sometimes from only one example. So there is a very different mechanism at place. Of course, another valid possibility may be that AI will never become a self, a someone, and it will always remain a simulation of intelligence, what philosopher John Searle calls weak AI. It would behave as if it had a mind, but in essence, it would be just a very hugely complicated clockwork orange, clockwork machine, sorry, my mind is, with nobody home on the inside. So there will be nobody home. We do not know if this is how AI will always be, but this is mainly because we do not know how there is someone home in each of us. We don't have a very good theory of that, which is sometimes called the hard problem of consciousness. But a crucial tentative finding of this thesis is that even if AGI will be strong AI, that is, it will have a mind of its own, and it would be someone in a certain sense, it would have volition, it would have conscious experience, that mind will likely be very different from our own mind. This is because it will have a very different experience of the world, of time, and of itself. Another finding which answers one of the main research questions is that humans would indeed still be special, even if in the radical scenario of AGI. This is mainly because intelligence as rationality, or intelligence as problem solving, is not the most distinctive aspect of human nature. Intelligence as problem solving seems to have evolved several times in the history of life on the planet Earth. The degree to which possess this kind of intelligence might be enough to distinguish us from the animals, as the Aristotelian tradition correctly assumed. However, the emergence of artificial general intelligence with equal or better competency than us will put that myth to rest once and for all. The fact that machines could become more intelligent than us demonstrates that intelligence, at least intelligence understood as I said before, cannot be the thing that renders us distinctive. But what is that thing then? That is a very important question. Well, it is hard to name one thing that captures the distinctiveness. But according to the conclusion of my research, this has to be formulated around the notions of relationality and relationship. In a multi-level model, this could mean speaking of relationality and relationship at various degrees of theological engagement. At the most theological level, one that is impossible to fully capture in words, the image of God is located in the personal relationship that humans enjoy with God. From an ontological point of view, this relationship is the very fundament of human existence. At the next level, personal relationality is both constitutive and distinctive to human nature. This is a conclusion that theological anthropology, evolutionary science, the philosophy of self, and even artificial intelligence reach independently from each other. We are the way we are because we are relational beings, and our intelligence and our personalities can only develop in relationship with others. At the third level, the one with the least theological engagement, we can speak of the structural capacities that enable human relationality and the flourishing of the image of God in us. What could these capacities be, you might wonder? Well, if we look at the Christological dimension of the divine image, this leads us to ask what were the necessary capacities that human nature needed to reach via evolution in order for the incarnation of God to be possible. The analysis in this thesis shows that these capacities are the same as those that enable personal relationships. In other words, if we ask ourselves what qualities should a certain species acquire by evolution in order for the divine logos to become a member of that species, we reach the conclusion that these are the same qualities that make personal relationships possible. Vulnerability is revealed as a key category in the life and teaching of Jesus Christ, and it is also highly relevant in defining us as distinctives from strong artificial intelligence. We have vulnerable bodies, we are emotionally vulnerable in our relationships with the others, and our thinking is characterized by profound vulnerability, in the sense that it is often marked by biases and by irrationality to a certain extent. These are all necessary conditions for authentic personal relationships that are free and intentional, although that might sound a bit paradoxical. But these are also precisely some of the features that strong AI is likely to lack, due to its radically different genesis and type of cognition. Finally, the ability to recognize the personhood in others might be a likely candidate to complete the picture of our distinctiveness. It is proven to be far less trivial than it might look at first glance. It is very likely uniquely human, it is not entirely rational, and it is instrumental in allowing us to activate and cultivate the divine image in us through our relationships with God and with one another. It is now time to briefly sketch the possible avenues that are open by the conclusions of this thesis. Firstly, I think that employing the multi-level model to define the Imago Dei has produced results that are promising, but still in need of further elaboration. The approach in the thesis was, of course, very much focused on the dialogue between theology and AI, but a lot more work needs to be done in theological anthropology to build a more coherent discourse around the doctrine of the divine image. Secondly, I think that the multi-level model has so far proven useful for articulating human distinctiveness, but it remains to be seen how suitable it is for other very hot areas of debate between theology and science, such as cosmology, theodicy, or spiritual experience. Thirdly, the analysis in this thesis was done within the confines of current paradigms and in AI, and it was marked by our still very limited understanding of the human mind and brain. The future in both of these fields looks very exciting, so I think the conclusions of this thesis will need to be re-evaluated in light of potential new scientific knowledge and technological developments. Last but not least, the centrality of relationship and relationality for human nature and human intelligence is something that deserves more consideration when we think about how to best organize our churches and even society at large. It is not wrong to say that our society, at least the Western society, has for a long time now been put on a very dangerous and slippery slope because of an emphasis on individualism and an over-appreciation for the type of rational intelligence, if you want, the left hemisphere type of intelligence. And I think this is also partly responsible for the unprecedented levels of dissatisfaction, of depression, of suicide that we see nowadays. This paradigm, at its most extreme, has led to the illusion that one could spend one's entire life in isolation, could interact only with avatars and intelligent bots in a simulated environment, and be happy and fulfilled. This is what people like Ray Kurzweil or Nick Bostrom seem to think. But this is obviously not true. The study of human nature, whether it is done with the tools of theology, of psychology, or even of artificial intelligence, reveals that there is no replacement for authentic personal relationships. God, the Holy Trinity, is relationship, and we human beings, God's image, are also relationship. Relationships are indeed risky, because we need to open ourselves and make ourselves vulnerable to the others. But in Christ, we know that we have a vulnerable God. And we know that this is what makes us human. Otherwise, we would be just, well, robots. Thank you.